We're being influenced all the time. The average person is exposed to anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 advertisements each day. When influence tactics seek to win through deception, to control you, or win while you lose, they become manipulative and can ruin your life. Being manipulated can be very expensive. Can you imagine confessing to a crime you didn't commit? According to the Innocence Project, almost 30% of people later exonerated by DNA evidence made a false confession. That means nearly a third of those who were later exonerated were manipulated into a false confession. The problem will likely be much worse since we're only talking about those later exonerated. Being manipulated into joining a high-demand, high-control religion can cost you relationships, a big chunk of your money and time, not to mention giving your life to something that is BS. Dr. Philip Zimbardo, a former Stanford University psychology professor who is perhaps the foremost American expert on the topic of social manipulation and mind control, confirms that when we realize we're being manipulated, we tend to react much more effectively than when we're being played by subtle, hard-to-detect manipulation tactics. Awareness is key. That's why today we share 8 of the most often used manipulation tactics by police, religions, romantic partners, cult leaders, spirituality groups, or really anyone who wants to rob you or control you. Manipulation tactic number 1, beware the appearance of nice, friendly, loving new friends. When people perceive that someone likes them or cares about them, they listen less critically to what is told to them and are also less apt to think negatively about the communicator. No wonder the Moonies used love bombing with people who were investigating their group. The police investigator who just wants to understand what happened seems friendly enough, but do they have your best interest at heart? We seek solutions when we feel depressed, lonely, confused, or want a form of healing. And we might lose our ability to evaluate that religion, new age group, or guru when it feels so good to be noticed, respected, cared for, or accepted. When you think of authentic friendships you've enjoyed, did they develop quickly, or did that happen over time? That's why the newfound attention, caring, respect, and friendship might not be real. Give it time to develop or to show itself for what it is. BS. Manipulation tactic number 2 is making minor requests to pave the way for uncomfortable big requests. Giving into minor, mildly uncomfortable requests makes it difficult to refuse more difficult and unsettling requests in the future. A police investigator might ask you easy, simple questions to prime the pump. A religious manipulator might ask no-brainer questions before the bigger ask. I've seen this work when they refuse to do little things, letting you know who is in control. If you can't get a glass of water, why would they grant your request to call a friend or an attorney? Timeshare high-pressure salespeople start with questions that sound like, do you feel recharged after a great vacation? Is there anything more important than quality time with your family? You can see where this is leading. Or if you don't see where the high-pressure salesperson is trying to lead you, you'll part with a lot of money. When you see them using easy questions, making simple requests, either refuse to answer or ask questions back at them. Why would you ask such an obvious question? Shine a spotlight on what they're doing, and like cockroaches, they will scurry to hide. That leads us to unveil the next manipulation tactic. Manipulation tactic number 3, isolation. Isolation means that they separate you, as much as they can, from friends, familiar surroundings, and contradictory information. A friend's mother disappeared for a month as part of her introductory base camp with a group that promised healing and so many other things. When I spoke to her after her month-long experience, she had obviously been radicalized with the group's beliefs. She was an emotional mess, clearly confused and distraught. And she had promised to steer clear of anyone or anything that would steal the good seed that had been planted. The group was trying to isolate her by having her cut off anyone or any information critical or contradictory to their beliefs. When I explained how groups try to isolate new recruits through isolation and information control, she opened up enough to evaluate the group's claims. And she got out before it was too late. Those who allowed themselves to be manipulated often gave the group all of their assets while gaining almost nothing in return. Talk about selling the farm for a fake gold mine. Speaking of selling the farm, let's unlock the next manipulation tactic. Manipulation tactic number 4, at least be open to a belief. We reject silly beliefs all the time. It's part of being a responsible adult. But when you reverse engineer those who end up adopting truly nonsensible beliefs, it all starts with being open to something that rational people reject. Back to manipulative police officers. Would it surprise you that they try to get you to believe that you might have done the crime, but somehow you have blocked it out? That's a form of staying open to a belief that isn't grounded in reality. A high-control religion asks potential recruits to stay open to the belief that a 19th century con man, their prophet, restored true Christianity and important rituals that can make you a god. I wish I were making this up. The key is embracing this silly belief is to stay open and to pray until you feel good about this belief. Once you feel good enough about the belief, you become a member and are expected to give 10% of your gross income and most of your time while living a very strict behavioral code. Hard pass. You can avoid this by staying open to contradictory information and rejecting the silly idea of a Christian restoration being true simply because of a good feeling. Yikes! Manipulation tactic number 5, the leader credibility grab. Jesus started a very harsh rebuke of religious leaders with the phrase, "You sit in Moses' seat." Who was Moses? A powerful character. The narrative has him speaking for God and giving rules. No wonder many religious and spiritual manipulators claim to speak for God or channel a higher dimension. Do they? It's hard to know for sure. That's why they claim it. The "We Speak for God" crowd often shares simple answers to complex problems. Some have been stupid enough to give predictions that can be evaluated, only to show later how wrong they were. Does that stop their followers from giving them time and money? No, because once you invest your resources and the group's identity becomes your identity, it's very hard to extract yourself from a high-demand group. Fear sells, and the "We Speak for God" crowd has a lot of fear to sell. There's a coming bad event, usually an apocalyptic event, but they're here to help you prepare for it because you're the elite who will usher in this new era. Lori Daybell allowed her children to be killed because Loverboy Chad, the prophet, viewed them as dark spirits and would get in the way of their holy calling to usher in Jesus 2.0. I wish I were making this up. It's so sad and so pathetic. Closely aligned with the credibility grab by speaking for God or some higher realm is the next tactic. Manipulation tactic number 6, bad guys are out to get you. They don't want you to hear their important message. They might be Satan, the deep state, the liberals, the you name it. Marvel comic legend Stan Lee said the villain was much more important to the story than the hero, because without the villain, you remove the need for the hero. With the villain, you have a need, but you also leverage the us versus them dynamic that creates loyalty to the group and gives meaning to true believers' sacrifice. Not all manipulators use a villain to manipulate, but enough do that it's worth mentioning as one of the manipulation tactics to watch out for. After a true believer in a fundamentalist religion agreed with most of information I provided to her, she said, "You are probably right, but I know there's a devil. You can't tell me otherwise, and I know he's motivating you to get me out of the truth. The devil." Of course, we had lunch yesterday. Manipulation tactic number 7, use of group dynamics. We're wired to play well with others. It feels weird for most of us to move against the grain of the group's thinking. So many psychological experiments have shown this, but the most famous ones are those conducted by Solomon Asch in the 1950s. Asch found that most people were willing to ignore reality and give an incorrect answer to conform to the rest of the group. Even when a person knew the right answer, they were much more likely to go along with what the group was telling them. Knowing this, how do manipulators use groups? Every way they can. In one manipulative, charismatic Christian church, the pastor encouraged everyone to shout with joy when it was time to give. Why? Well, the thinking was that when we give to God, He gives to us. So shout. One Sunday, he announced the time for giving, and I wasn't shouting because it felt manipulative. He stopped the service and called me out for not shouting. It was awkward, to say the least. He was using the group to manipulate me. Cults use group confession sessions as a way to get you to confess sins or shortcomings. Excommunicating someone from a group is another way to punish them and try to diminish their influence on others. Most of us grew up with peer pressure and know how damaging that can be. Have you ever conformed to avoid rejection and get a reward from the group such as acceptance, respect, or admiration? If so, you're human. Groups can police obedience to endless rules or get you to accept a decision that is nothing more than groupthink. Cults, gangs, political parties, religious organizations, and so many others understand the power of groups and use them extensively. The cure is twofold. Grow your power for dissent and develop friendships outside of the group. Outsiders will tell you how ridiculous your group's behaviors, beliefs, or actions are. Plus, they will be there for you when you finally decide to move on. The eighth and final manipulation tactic we're discussing today is using hypnotic techniques. Any technique that causes you to lower your rational filters fits in this category. Repetition is one way to do this. When a church plays the same phrase from a song 50 times, it can lull you into a trance that makes you more susceptible to suggestion. We've already talked about one technique, using yes answers to prime you for a bigger ask. We've also covered another earlier, and that's when an authority figure asks or commands you to do something. Remember that person who said they speak for God, or who wears a lab coat, or who looks and sounds like they're in charge? A form of hypnotic suggestion is when they ask you to do something that doesn't seem right. If it doesn't feel right emotionally or logically, it's probably not, regardless of who is suggesting it. When manipulators create a state of confusion, you're more likely to accept a suggestion that moves you back to the feeling of order. The same is true of sleep deprivation. You're more likely to confess to a crime you didn't commit after being hounded for hours and deprived of sleep. Participants couldn't use the bathroom in one personal development seminar except for the times approved by the facilitator. Approval depended on the group's progress, made by making and keeping simple commitments. These 8 manipulation techniques represent the most used manipulation techniques you'll see with police, religious groups, personal development groups, and other manipulators. Manipulation can cost you your life. Knowing how to spot and navigate manipulation is an essential modern skill. Thanks for joining us today at the Change Capability Group.